Pump number 6, Enfield, big stop.
It is the moment police finally corner the gunman. 11:25 on Sunday morning.
He was spotted in the Brookfield area wearing what appeared to be an RCMP uniform and driving what looked to be a police cruiser, a mock-up.
A lone gunman masquerading as a police officer killed 22 people, including a pregnant woman.
For it to have gotten that far and for other people to have lost their lives and it not to be controlled, we need to work better and do better and just be better.
In some cases, relatives waited hours, even days, for information about their loved ones.
I apologize for failing.
The worst mass shooting in Canada's history, and we still don't have all the answers, but we're getting closer. And there's a lot we do know, that it was an unimaginably horrible ordeal. 13 terrible hours, 22 people killed by a lone gunman masquerading as an RCMP police officer.
This was a very quickly evolving situation and a chaotic scene.
You know, you're on edge. It's a small community, you know, and thinking, well, you know, if they do cross the river, I haven't slept.
But we also know the rampage and the response to it was plagued by chaos, confusion, and frustration. So much so that 3 months later, facing public outcry and protest, Canada's Public Safety Minister announced an inquiry. It lasted 7 months, saw thousands of documents, and the final report, it'll be released tomorrow as 7 volumes, totaling some 3,000 pages. So today on About That, key moments from the inquiry that tell us something we might never have otherwise known.
We want a public inquiry, and we're not giving up until we get one, because they're trying to hide stuff, and we want to know what it is.
What you're doing is hurting us by not giving us what we asked for.
Sarah Ritchie, you are a reporter with the Canadian Press. You've covered extensively the shooting rampage itself. I know you have been following the inquiry, and you must be looking forward to tomorrow when we sort of finally see in its totality what kind of represents our best snapshot of everything that happened.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me and for a lot of people who were in Nova Scotia at the time, you know, it's been a really long wait for these answers. I think there's a little bit of trepidation for me, especially, Andrew, about whether we're actually going to get those answers that we had been looking for. Because I think it's really important to remember, too, that from the moment that this occurred in April 2020, the RCMP has said it doesn't want to talk. And so that's been the missing piece for a lot of us.
Well, let's talk about what we did learn through this inquiry. And you know, one of the big problems with how those terrible moments unfolded was with the police response. And really the question of whether Nova Scotia RCMP kind of had any kind of a coherent command structure in those critical early hours of the shooting. Let's listen to this.
I believe it was Al Carroll asked me at some point, are we for evacuating? I had to ask Stuart Brissell. He said, well, we have evacuated some houses. Right. And he said, we haven't cleared them in a sense that they didn't go through every room to make sure the bad guy's not in there. Yeah. They just got people out of the house if they chose to leave. Some people wanted to stay put.
Right. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah. It doesn't appear to have been a decision made from a command level down to the contact team on what they were going to do. It appears that it was left with the contact team.
Yeah, so for instance, we didn't order people out of their houses. Like we didn't say to them, no, you tell them they have to come. Right. And if not, arrest them for obstruction and get them out of the community. We didn't do that, right?
But nor did you order them to shelter in place at that point.
No.
No. The decision was left with the contact team?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, very good.
So what does that exchange tell you, Sarah?
So much about what was happening that night. So I think really important context to what we just heard is the fact that what he's talking about, that IARD team, the contact team that was in Portapique in the early hours after police got reports that people were being murdered and fires were being set and there was gunshots ringing out in this rural community. And so there were 3 officers on foot with no cars, with no GPS tracking, with limited communication ability. And those 3 officers referred multiple times in their subsequent interviews with the commission to the fact that they felt there were too many cooks in the kitchen. There were too many voices on the radio. There was too much going on, too much chaos from the upper part of the command structure, that they just tuned out the radio at a certain point and they just started making decisions on their own. And I think that tells you a lot about how chaotic it was and how impossible it was for those officers to be able to do, I think, more than they were able to do there.
Right. And Sarah, I mean, this vacuum of capability and of clear intel and clear information. And, on that front, I think of, people not being given clear advice or orders on how to react. I mean, we know that this turned things into a nightmare for some. And like, I still remember the ordeal of Clinton Ellison, right? His brother Corey, ventured off to try to help with a fire he had seen. He was then killed by the gunman, and Clinton spent hours hiding in the woods.
I walked up looking for my brother with a flashlight, and I could see a body laying on the side of the road. As I got closer, I could see it was my brother. I got one more step closer, I could see blood, and he wasn't moving. I shut my flashlight off, I turned around, and I ran for my life.
So that kind of uncertainty, I mean, it's horrifying, but not unique, right, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people who were living in Portapique at the time, there was this sense that they had no idea what was going on. We heard from, there's other witnesses that I spoke to in the course of my reporting on this story who said they didn't know what was going on. They woke up some point in the night and just woke up to chaos around them. I think that interview with Clinton Ellison is really, really hard to listen to still. That kind of lack of communication, but just the chaos in general that people experienced. It was such a poignant part of what happened because it compounded the horror of what had just gone on in this tiny community, and it kind of made the horror continue.
And to a point that you made earlier when we first started talking, there are those who thought or hoped that this inquiry would be a source of answers, but on that count, many would say it fell far short.
For months, the Mass Casualty Commission has faced criticism from the families, but that criticism became much louder yesterday.
Wanted to see the vehicle.
You're under oath there, Wayne.
No interruptions, please.
Under oath.
That's enough. That's enough.
Not enough. No, this is enough. This whole bull.
The two officers that are on the schedule will be testifying virtually via Zoom. No cross-examination, no direct cross-examination from the victims' families' lawyers. And also, it won't be live streamed, so the public won't be able to see this testimony until its recording is posted onto the inquiry's website.
This trauma-informed thing, I mean, the only people they seem to want to protect is what information goes to the public. Like, the families have already been traumatized as far as they're going to get. We want information.
Listening to those clips, it recalls all of the frustration that the families had right from the beginning, from the very first press conference that RCMP gave, where they couldn't even tell us how many victims they had. They didn't tell us, any information about what had gone on. The only, victim they were able to identify at that point was one of their officers. And I think that lack of transparency was the whole reason why an inquiry was needed. And it didn't really live up to the expectations of a lot of people in terms of being able to get accountability for these kind of things. Getting an answer from the officers who were on the scene, getting clear answers from them to questions that perhaps the commission lawyers wouldn't have thought to ask or didn't ask. That was an opportunity that the families really wanted, and they didn't get it.
Okay, Sarah, you mentioned three words there, lack of transparency. That's a thought that we're going to pick up on after this commercial break. Hey there, welcome back to About That. So with the final report due out tomorrow from the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission, that commission looking into the worst mass shooting in Canadian history, that was in Nova Scotia almost 3 years ago, we've been, over the course of this program, kind of diving back into the inquiry and pulling out some key moments from that inquiry that tell us something important about what might be in tomorrow's report. And to help us do that, Sarah Ritchie joining us, your reporter from the Canadian Press. You know, going back to this idea of lack of transparency at the inquiry, but also in terms of clear communication with the public at the time. And I'm thinking of warning the public. You know, there might have been a way for those, for police in those early hours to give clearer and stronger guidance to people. But there was absolutely a way for them to get information out in a broader, more urgent way as well. So this was another key moment of the inquiry.
Would it be your view as the chief of police for Truro that on April 19th, 2020, Alert Ready was accessible by the Truro Police Service?
Yep.
And it worked just fine?
Correct.
Right. And if you had wanted, say, on April 15th of 2020, if you as the chief of police for Truro had decided that you needed to issue a ready alert for public safety reasons, you would have picked up the phone, correct?
Correct.
You would have contacted your EMO contact person.
Correct.
You would have told them what you wanted in the message. Yes?
Correct, yep.
And then you would have hung up the phone.
Correct.
Yeah. So between your decision to make a ready alert call and when that alert goes out, do you have any sense of how long that would take in total?
I don't want to speculate or estimate, but I wouldn't think it'd be too long. I mean, it's an emergency, so they're good at what they do, and I don't think it would take all that long.
Sarah, explain why that moment was so significant.
So on the night of April 19th and then into the morning of April 20th, as this killing rampage continued for over 13 hours, the people of Nova Scotia had very little warning and very little information about what was happening. One thing that the police could have done in that instance is that they could have contacted Nova Scotia's Emergency Management Office and sent out an emergency alert. So Alert Ready, that's the system that, they do tests on it every now and then, and it makes your phone make all sorts of noises, and it cuts in on TV and radio. And that's the whole point, right? It's supposed to let you know that something is happening very urgently. The provincial government, once it heard that something was going on, they were already in a state of alert because of the COVID-19 pandemic. They actually called in staff to their emergency operations office and said, okay, we need to be on standby. We need to be ready to send out one of these alerts. And it took hours for the RCMP to sort of craft a message about what they wanted people to know. So in the meantime, what they had been doing is sending out tweets. There's all sorts of reasons why that was a very bad idea. First of all, we're talking about rural Nova Scotia. Cell service is spotty at best. The population, frankly, is quite a bit older. People just aren't on Twitter, and they're not looking to Twitter or to Facebook necessarily in these instances for the kind of information that's going to save your life. And there was a particular moment in the testimony where one of the senior officers was asked, if this happened again, would you use Alert Ready? And they said they don't know.
And unfortunately for the families of victims, poor communication would persist, well beyond the 13, 14 hours of the shooting rampage. Let's listen to this.
It has been 19 months since Nick Beaton marched in the streets demanding a public inquiry.
We're just kept in the dark, and we're just fed lip service to make us feel better, thinking we're going to go away, and we're not.
Sarah, was that lack of answers consistent across all family members of victims?
For the most part, it was. I will say that for the family members of the victims that I spoke with, this was a very consistent message that they had a very hard time learning from the RCMP firsthand what was going on. One thing that we learned during this inquiry is that there were two RCMP liaison officers. One was assigned to the families of most of the victims, and one was assigned to the family of Constable Heidi Stevenson. And so there had always been, from the very beginning of this process, a very different way of handling the death of one of their own officers. And we heard that on April 20th when the RCMP gave a press conference, and they talked about how they had gone to Constable Stevenson's home and sat down with her family and talked with them about what had gone on. At the same time, that evening, some of the victims' family members were still waiting to hear, and they were, anxiously, anguished, waiting, calling their loved ones and trying to figure out what's going on. That kind of lack of communication has been so re-traumatizing for so many people. And I think it's continued through the course of this inquiry, just the frustration with not being able to get answers. And I hope that the release of tomorrow's report maybe brings some peace to some people and a bit of closure, but I'm not sure that it will.
Okay, Sarah, Ritchie, I know there's still so much more that we could have talked about, and we may very well yet have more to talk about once we have the final report in our hands. But thank you so much for guiding us through all of this. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrew.
And thank you for tuning into About That. We'll see you here tomorrow.